I don't care what that boarding pass says. People like you don't sit in this section. The words came out of Vivien Archer's mouth the way a verdict comes out of a courtroom. No hesitation, no volume adjustment, no apology warming the edges. Said in the clear, caring tone of a woman who had spoken like this before and had never once been told she was wrong. She was standing in the first-class aisle of transatlantic flight 608 bound for London Heathrow, her champagne silk blouse catching the soft overhead cabin lighting in a way that announced wealth without needing to explain itself. Her blazer was fitted at the waist with the kind of tailoring that says money in 3 languages. Her platinum hair was pinned with a casual precision that takes time and is designed to look like it didn't. Her heels were low enough to be practical and expensive enough to matter. She was looking at the young man in seat 3A. He was 23 years old. He was black. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt, dark jeans, and sneakers that had been washed once too many times. His hands were folded in his lap. He was not doing anything. He had been doing nothing, in fact, since the moment he boarded, sitting quietly with his eyes half closed. Running something through his head that had nothing to do with this woman, this cabin, or the decision she had just made about him in the span of a single glance. She had not asked for his boarding pass. She had not checked the manifest. She had not spoken to a crew member or reviewed a single policy. She had looked at him, his face, his clothes, the quiet and still way he sat, and she had made a calculation. Fast, ugly, and dressed up as certainty. What Vivien Archer could not have known standing in that aisle in her fitted blazer and her champagne silk was that she had just made the most consequential mistake of her life. She didn't see it coming. People armored in power rarely do. The certainty that carries you forward when you have been in charge for a long time also makes you blind to edges, to the exact moment when the ground is preparing to give. The ground was preparing to give. In less than 20 minutes, the pilot of Flight 608 was going to step out of his cockpit. He was going to walk the length of that first-class cabin with the slow, deliberate authority of a man who has landed aircraft on 3 continents in conditions most people would refuse to board for. And when he stopped, and when he spoke, every single person on that aircraft was going to go completely still. Not because of weather, not because of turbulence. Because of what he was about to say about the young man Vivien Archer had just tried to erase. Before we go any further into this story, I want to take 1 second to ask where you are watching this from right now. Drop your city or your country in the comments below. And if you believe that every single person deserves to be treated with dignity no matter what they look like, no matter what they're wearing, no matter whose money bought the seat next to them, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like right now. Stories like this one need to reach people. Stories like this are exactly why this channel exists. Now, let me take you back to the beginning because what happened on Flight 608 started long before Vivien Archer ever opened her mouth in that aisle. Let's go. John F. Kennedy International Airport at 6 in the morning is its own specific universe. It does not resemble the city surrounding it. The terminal corridors have a pressurized, dislocated quality fluorescent lights that are slightly too bright for the hour announcements in 4 languages, overlapping in the middle distance the particular smell of coffee that is always slightly burnt and always necessary. Travelers move through it in a specific kind of fog. The ones who have done this many times move with economy. No wasted steps, no looking at signs they already know. The ones who haven't move with careful, wide-eyed alertness, afraid of making the wrong turn and missing something important. Gate 47 was quieter than most of them. Transatlantic Flight 608 was a red-eye to London Heathrow, and the passengers waiting there in the gray early morning were mostly the kind who had done this before. They sat with laptops and noise-canceling headphones and the particular focused quietness of people who consider airports an inconvenient but manageable part of their professional lives. One of them was not like the rest. Darius Okafor sat in the gate area with his backpack on the floor between his feet and a small paperback book open on his knee that he was absolutely not reading. His eyes were half closed. He was 23 years old, and he was running the opening bars of Elgar's cello concerto in E minor through his head for what felt like the 1,000th time that week. Not the mechanics, not the technical fingering sequence he had been drilling since October. The feeling of it. The specific way the bow was supposed to find the string with exactly the right weight. Not too heavy, not too light. The way a hand finds another hand in the dark. Certain, deliberate, already there before you've decided to reach. He had been playing cello since he was 12 years old. He grew up in West Philadelphia in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that backed up to an elevated rail line. The trains ran at all hours. His mother, Gloria, was a registered nurse at Jefferson Hospital, 4 overnight shifts a week when he was young 3 when her knees started to make demands. She drove him to lessons every Saturday morning from the time he was 12 until he was old enough to take the bus himself, and then she sat in the parked car outside with the engine off and a crossword puzzle book in her lap and waited. Every week. 11 years of it. She never complained. Not once in 11 years did she make him feel like any of it was a sacrifice. The cello itself had been purchased with the proceeds from his grandmother's gold bracelet. They didn't speak about that. They didn't need to. He knew, and she knew that he knew, and the music was what they were both making with it. Darius had earned a spot in the final round of the Royal Academy of Music Scholarship competition in London. 3 rounds of recorded submissions, each one reviewed by a panel of faculty judges he would never meet in person. A 45-minute live video audition that left him shaking for an hour afterward, sitting on the floor of his mother's kitchen with his hands still trembling from the adrenaline. And now this, the final stage. An in-person performance, 5 judges in a room, 1 outcome. He had done everything he could do from Philadelphia. Everything left was in London, in a room he hadn't entered yet, with a piece of music he knew the way he knew his own name. He was flying first class. Not because he had any business being in a first-class cabin at 23 with a savings account that had $1,100 in it and a used Mazda that needed new brake pads. He was flying first class because the Meridian Arts Foundation, the nonprofit organization that had been supporting his development since he was 14, paying for competitions and master classes and instrument maintenance, had arranged it specifically for this trip. The instrument he was traveling with needed to be in a climate-controlled cabin. The cargo hold of a commercial aircraft was not appropriate for a 19th-century French cello valued at $250,000 on the open market. In the overhead bin directly above seat 3A, there was a black carbon fiber case. Inside that case was the cello on loan from the Foundation's private collection, packed with the particular care you give to something that exists in only 1 copy in the world and cannot be replaced if something goes wrong. Inside Darius was everything his mother had worked for, and everything he had worked for, and something else underneath both of those things. The specific weight of a dream that has come close enough to feel real but has not yet fully arrived, and the fear that the distance between almost and there is larger than it looks. He had boarded early. The gate agent who scanned his boarding pass, a young woman named Rosa Medina, dark hair in a neat braid, 3 years working Gate 47, the kind of competent and warm that airports rarely reward, adequately had looked at the pass, looked at the cello case, and smiled the real kind of smile. "That for a performance?" she asked. "Scholarship audition," he said. "London." "Good luck," Rosa said, and she meant it fully. He carried that small warmth with him to seat 3A. He placed the case in the overhead bin with the careful deliberateness of someone managing something irreplaceable. He settled into his seat. He put his hands in his lap. He closed his eyes. He was by every available measure the quietest and least threatening person on that aircraft. He knew this. He also knew, because his mother had taught him, and the world had confirmed it in rooms and hallways, and waiting areas over and over since he was a child, that this fact had never once been sufficient protection on its own. So he kept his hands visible. He kept his voice low when he used it. He took up exactly the space that was his. He breathed. He waited for London. Vivien Archer boarded Flight 608 the way she boarded every flight, with the practiced, efficient authority of someone for whom airports are not experiences, but logistics. She was 51. Senior Vice President at Caldwell Archer Capital, a private equity firm with offices in Manhattan, London, and Singapore. She had closed deals on 3 continents and testified before a Senate Finance Subcommittee, and once described the elimination of 400 jobs in a shareholder call as a recalibration of human capital, without blinking and without apology. She had been profiled in 2 financial magazines. She sat on 4 boards. She had not had a genuinely unexpected morning in 11 years. This morning had been unexpected. The market correction that began Wednesday had continued deteriorating through the weekend. 3 of her major portfolio positions were underwater in ways that demanded in-person conversations with her London team, not calls, not video, in person at the table with the documents in front of everyone and no ability to hide behind the slight compression of a screen. She had been scheduled to fly private. Her firm maintained a standing arrangement with a charter service out of Teterboro, but the aircraft had been grounded at 4 a.m. due to a hydraulics problem, and she had been forced with the specific cold fury of someone who does not expect to be told no to book a commercial seat on the only available direct flight. First class at minimum. That was non-negotiable. She had managed that. But not the seat position she preferred, not the aisle configuration, not the conditions she had planned for, and not the morning she had anticipated. She moved down the first-class aisle with her chin at its usual angle, slightly elevated, slightly forward, the posture of someone assessing every environment she enters and finding it mostly adequate. Her carry-on was structured burgundy leather. Her garment bag hung from her right shoulder. She wore the silk blouse and the fitted blazer because London required it, and because Vivien Archer did not have a casual register for professional travel. She found her seat, 3C. She reached up and opened the overhead bin above 3C. Inside, the pilot's emergency medical kit pressed to one side, and a small roller bag belonging to a crew member. No usable space for both her carry-on and her garment bag. She closed the bin with a short, firm movement that communicated her assessment of this situation without requiring words. She looked across the aisle. The bin above 3A was open. She reached across the aisle and opened it. Inside, one large black carbon fiber case centered, taking up the majority of the available space. One small backpack pushed to one side. There was room, technically. If she repositioned the case, if she put pressure on it, if she leveraged her garment bag in alongside it and used the force of her arm to settle it into place. She reached in with both hands. She gripped the handle of the garment bag and prepared to angle it into the space her body weight behind the movement. Darius was on his feet before the bag had moved 2 inches. "Please don't do that." He said it the way you say something when you have one chance to say it correctly. Not a shout, not a plea. Clear and direct, the words shaped by the specific urgency of someone who knows exactly what is in that case, and exactly what the weight of that bag would do to the neck of a 19th century instrument that cannot be replaced. His hand came up open-palmed, not grabbing, not aggressive, interposed between her hands and the handle of the case. A barrier, not a threat. "Please, there's a fragile antique instrument in that case. If you force something next to it, the pressure will crack the neck. The damage would be permanent. I can help you find space further back. There's usually room near the galley." Vivien looked at his hand. She looked at him, slowly. The full, unhurried assessment of someone who has spent her career evaluating things and making decisions quickly and has rarely been wrong in her own estimation. He was 23, white t-shirt, jeans, worn sneakers, young, black, quiet. She released the garment bag. She straightened to her full height and looked at Darius with the expression of someone encountering something they have already categorized. "I beg your pardon," she said. It was not a question. "I'm sorry to interrupt you," he said, and his voice stayed even, and he meant the apology not for existing in the seat, not for having the case there, but for the physical interruption, for the unavoidable awkwardness of the moment. "The instrument is on loan. I'm responsible for it. I had to stop you before it was damaged." She looked at the case, then back at him. "Whose instrument is it?" she said. "It's on loan from the Meridian Arts Foundation. I'm traveling to London for a scholarship audition at the Royal Academy of Music." She tilted her head a fraction. The motion communicated skepticism with the efficiency of someone who has practiced it until it requires almost no effort. "And the foundation," she said, "arranged a first-class ticket for you specifically. They upgraded my economy ticket because the instrument can't travel in cargo. There's documentation with the airline. The accommodation was cleared before boarding." Vivien looked at him one more time. Slower this time. His t-shirt, his sneakers, the backpack pushed to the side of the bin, the carbon fiber case that was undeniably taking up space she wanted to use. And then she said the sentence that would cost her everything spoken, with the steady confidence of someone who had always gotten away with saying exactly this kind of thing in exactly this kind of tone. "I don't care what that boarding pass says. People like you don't sit in this section." The first-class cabin dropped into silence the way a room drops into silence when something has been said that cannot be taken back. Not dramatically, not all at once. Like a sound being turned down slowly on a dial, the ambient murmur of pre-departure settling into something lower, stiller, electrically charged. The man in 2B, Richard Galt, 63, commercial real estate, 18 flights on this route, lowered his newspaper exactly 1 inch. He did not lower it further. The woman in 1A glanced up from her laptop, registered the sentence, looked back down at the screen. In seat 4C, just past the dividing curtain between first and business class. Sophia Reyes had already reached for her phone without thinking about it. The reflex of 4 years covering civil rights and discrimination stories, the trained instinct of a journalist who knows this moment and has learned to be faster than the moment itself. She angled the screen forward. She pressed record. She did not stand up. She did not draw attention. She simply pressed record and held the phone steady. Darius sat back down. He placed both hands flat on his knees. Both hands, visible, deliberate, a practice his mother had taught him without using those words in 100 small ways over 100 different situations. You show them your hands, not because you've done anything wrong, because it matters what they see, and you are not going to give them anything to misread. He breathed. Underneath the steadiness, underneath the flat palms and the controlled breath, there was a fist making itself inside his chest. Not rage. Something more disciplined than rage. The effort of a person who knows that the cost of losing composure here is higher than the cost of keeping it, and who has made this calculation before in other rooms and has always chosen the composure and has never once stopped feeling what it costs. He looked at his hands. He waited. The lead flight attendant's name was Marcus Webb. 38. 15 years with Transatlantic. He had the particular composure of someone who has seen most of what a first-class cabin can produce and has learned to move toward problems with the exact right amount of speed fast enough to suggest competence measured enough not to escalate. He came down the aisle when he heard the raised voice. His expression was calibrated to a neutral professionalism that revealed nothing while concealing the quiet, rapid assessment happening behind it. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Vivien turned to face him before Darius could speak. She did it with the practiced ease of someone who understands that the first account given sets the frame for everything that follows. "Yes, Marcus?" She read his name tag with the fluency of someone who has filed airline complaints before there is absolutely a problem. She gestured toward Darius with the back of her hand, not pointing exactly, but indicating the gesture of someone referring to a subject, not a person. This passenger is monopolizing overhead bin space above his seat with an unauthorized oversized item. When I attempted to access that bin for my luggage, he physically interfered. He put his hands on me. I placed my open hand near the case, Darius said. I didn't touch her. He kept his voice level. The instrument was cleared at check-in. There should be documentation in the manifest, a special accommodation note from the Meridian Arts Foundation. Marcus looked between them. He was doing math he didn't want to do. On one side, a passenger whose transatlantic platinum elite status was marked in bright red on his manifest screen, 47 flights in the past calendar year. The kind of frequent flyer whose complaint calls go directly to corporate. On the other, a third-party non-profit upgrade he hadn't processed himself attached to a name he didn't immediately recognize on a seat he hadn't double-checked this morning. The math of institutional liability did not favor Darius. Marcus knew this. He hated that he knew it. "Let me verify the booking," he said. He tapped through the manifest on his tablet. Seat 3A, Darius Okafor. Economy class upgraded to first by Meridian Arts Foundation account. Special accommodation notation, climate-controlled cabin for loaned antique instrument, pre-approval reference number attached. Checked and confirmed by operations. Everything was in order. Completely clearly in order. Marcus looked at the cello case. He looked at the notation. He looked at Darius. "The booking is verified," he said to Vivien. "The accommodation was approved before departure. I can stow your garment bag in the forward closet." Vivien's hand came up precisely, stopping his sentence mid-delivery. "No." Her voice didn't rise. It became more focused the way a lens becomes focused, gathering rather than spreading. "I did not make an arrangement with my firm's corporate account that involved storing my garment bag in the forward closet like an economy standby passenger. I paid a premium fare. I am entitled to overhead bin access above my seat." She turned to look at Darius again, and this time the look stayed on him a second longer than necessary, in a way that communicated something that was not about the bin at all. "I want to see this passenger's boarding pass. Personally. Right now." "Ma'am," Marcus started. "I've already confirmed I want to see it." The voice that said it had closed hostile acquisitions, had won budget arguments, had once made a junior analyst cry in a glass-walled conference room and described it later as a necessary part of the learning curve. It was the voice of someone who has made a demand and intends to receive what was demanded, and the interval between the demand and the receiving is simply a formality. Marcus looked at Darius. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it in a way he couldn't express within the context of his job. "Could you show the boarding pass, please?" Darius reached into his front pocket and produced it. He held it out, looking at Marcus, not at Vivien. His hand was completely steady. Whatever was occurring inside him at that moment, and there was quite a lot occurring, none of it was reaching his hands. Vivien took the boarding pass from Marcus. She examined it with the methodical focus of someone searching for a flaw. She turned it slightly. She read the seat assignment, the class indicator, the foundation account number listed in the upgrade field. She handed it back. "How does a foundation?" she said, and she paused just long enough before foundation that the pause did something the words themselves didn't say outright. "Purchase a first-class upgrade for a private individual," Marcus said. "Several non-profit organizations maintain accounts with us for exactly this kind of accommodation. It's a standard. And anyone could submit a booking under that account." "Name?" Vivien continued as though Marcus hadn't spoken. She said it to the space between them, to the cabin, not to any particular person. "You have no independent way of verifying that this young man is who he claims to be. You have no way of verifying that case contains what he says it contains." Darius said quietly, "I have documentation." He reached into his backpack. He produced a folded letter on Meridian Arts Foundation letterhead, clean and specific, the foundation's contact information, the airline's pre-approval reference number, the instrument's insurance, details, a brief description of the audition program. He held it out. Vivien did not take it. She regarded it with the expression of someone evaluating evidence they find inconvenient. "Anyone can print letterhead," she said. From seat 4C past the divider, Sophia Reyes kept recording. She had not moved. She had not spoken. She was watching Vivien's face and Darius's hands with the focused attention of someone who has learned that the most valuable thing a journalist can do in a moment like this is not intervene in it, but document it with absolute precision. Marcus took the letter. He read it. It was clear, thorough, and bore every piece of corroborating information that could be asked for. He handed it back to Darius. Ms. Archer Marcus said, "The documentation is legitimate." I can assure you Vivien looked past him. She looked at Richard Galt across the aisle in 3B, who had been watching over the top of his newspaper with the expression of someone trying to decide whether to have an opinion. She looked at the passenger in 2C, a white woman in her 40s who had been staring at her phone for the last 4 minutes without doing anything with it. Then she turned back to Marcus and she said loudly enough for 2 full rows to absorb it, "I am a Platinum Elite member at the highest tier of this airline's loyalty program. I have flown transatlantic 47 times. I am telling you that I am not satisfied with this young man's verification, and I am not comfortable with this situation. His presence in this cabin has not been confirmed to my standard. His luggage is blocking my access, and he physically interfered with me when I attempted to use shared cabin space." She let a beat pass. "I think the crew should take a much closer look at that case." The sentence settled over the cabin like something dropped from a height. What it suggested, what it was designed to suggest without ever using a specific word, was understood by everyone in rows 1 through 5. Darius kept his hands flat on his knees. The specific kind of discipline that took to sit with both hands visible on your own knees while someone stood 3 feet away and questioned the legitimacy of your existence in a room you had every right to be in was invisible to most of the people watching. It was the kind of effort that doesn't show. That's exactly what it costs. Marcus looked at his younger colleague, Heather Voss, who had come to the aisle entrance from the galley and was watching with wide, uncertain eyes. He looked at the letter in Darius's hand. He looked at Vivien, who was watching him with the patient confidence of a woman who has learned that when you apply enough pressure in the right place, institutions give way. He looked at the tablet in his hand. He made the decision he would regret for a long time. "Ms. Archer," he said, "I'll speak with my supervisor." He turned toward the galley. Heather followed him. Vivien smoothed the front of her blazer with small, precise movements and waited. The supervisor changed nothing. Her name was Greta. She had seniority over Marcus, and she listened to Vivien Archer's account with the professional attentiveness of someone who has navigated 100 passenger disputes and knows that the fastest path to resolution is rarely the most just one. She reviewed the manifest. She confirmed the documentation. She offered for the 3rd time to stow the garment bag in the forward closet. Vivien declined for the 3rd time with the same measured finality she had used the first 2 times. Greta attempted to redirect the conversation toward departure preparation. Vivien let her try. Then she waited until Greta had turned away. She pressed the call button. When Heather Voss appeared, Vivien looked at her. "I feel threatened," she said. 3 words, said with total control. The specific construction of a sentence that has been designed to do one thing: transfer responsibility. Not "I am making an accusation." Not "I believe something is wrong." I feel. Because feeling is subjective, unchallengeable, and under aviation regulations precisely the kind of report that must be acted upon regardless of whether the underlying facts support it. Heather looked at Darius in seat 3A. He had not moved. His hands were on his knees. He was looking at the seat back in front of him with the still inward focus of someone managing a great deal on the inside while showing very little on the outside. Ma'am Heather said carefully, "The crew has reviewed the situation and the documentation." "I feel threatened," Vivien said again. Her voice had not changed. She did not add anything to the sentence. She simply said it again, allowing the repetition to do the work that explanation would not. Heather looked toward the galley where Marcus was standing with his arms folded, and the expression of a man watching a decision being made that he can see the shape of but cannot stop. He gave a small pained nod. Heather went to the intercom. Darius heard the call go out. He heard the phrasing passenger dispute first-class security requested, and something in his chest dropped the way things drop when a situation has moved past reason into the territory of institutional force, where the truth of what happened becomes secondary to the power of who made the report. He reached into his pocket. He typed 4 words and sent them to the contact saved in his phone under a single letter M. The M stood for James Adeyemi, 41, the Meridian Arts Foundation's program director and his primary point of contact for 3 years. James had been at his desk in Midtown since 6:40 that morning, specifically because he knew which flight Darius was on, knew what was at stake in London, and had a professional anxiety about travel days that had nothing to do with the weather. The 4 words were, "It is happening. Stand by." The response came in under 10 seconds. "Ready. I'm watching." Darius put the phone in his pocket. He looked at the window. The tarmac outside was a flat gray expanse in the early morning light. Ground crew moved between aircraft with the practiced indifference of people who have seen 10,000 departures and will see 10,000 more. None of this registered as remarkable to any of them. A plane, a gate, another ordinary morning. He ran the Elgar through his head, the opening low and certain, the bow finding the string. 2 Port Authority police officers came through the forward door 11 minutes later. Officer Dale Greer was 44 broad through the jaw and shoulders, with the flat-eyed efficiency of a man who has worked airports long enough to have reduced most human situations to a manageable set of categories. His partner, Officer Luis Morales, was younger, quieter, his dark eyes moving quickly and carefully across the cabin as he walked. They spoke briefly with Marcus near the galley. Marcus pointed toward row 3. The pointing was reluctant in a way that his posture communicated clearly, and his words did not. They walked toward row 3. Greer assessed the scene at row 3 the way he assessed every scene quickly against a mental template built from experience. On one side of the aisle, a woman in a silk blouse, platinum hair, the posture of established authority watching the officer's arrival with the patient attention of someone expecting a delivery. On the other side, a young black man in a white t-shirt, hands flat on his knees, looking up at the approaching officers with an expression that was carefully composed in a way that only happens when someone is working very hard to make sure it is. Greer approached Darius. "Son, I need to see your ID and boarding pass." Darius produced both without a word. His passport, his boarding pass, both in order, both immediately verifiable. He held them out with both hands so both hands remained visible at all times. Greer examined the documents. Everything was legal, correct. The passport confirmed his age, 23. The boarding pass showed seat 3 a first-class upgrade processed by non-profit account. He handed them back. He looked at the overhead bin. He looked at the case. He looked at Vivien Archer, who met his gaze with the composed expectancy of someone who has made a request and is waiting to see whether the people responsible for delivering it understand their role. "We're going to need you to step off the aircraft with us," Son Greer said. "We'll run your luggage through secondary screening. It's standard procedure." The cabin absorbed this in a silence that felt different from the silences before it. Heavier, more final. Sophia Reyes's phone kept recording. Patrick Ogundimu, 52. The architect in seat 2A, a large, deliberate man who had been watching since the moment Vivien opened the overhead bin, who had been cataloging every word and every gesture with the exhausted, precise attention of a black man on a plane, who has learned to do this because it has mattered, before placed his coffee cup on his tray table with infinite care and looked at the floor and breathed. Carol Dietrich in 2B watched Darius and felt something she recognized moving in her chest. Something that was asking her a question she wasn't ready to answer yet. Darius kept his voice level. "Officer, if I leave this aircraft, they will close the boarding door. I will miss my flight. I have an audition at the Royal Academy of Music in London tomorrow morning. It is a full scholarship audition. It is the thing I have been working toward for 11 years. He paused. "You can open the case right here. I will give you every piece of documentation I have. I am not trying to make this difficult." He reached toward his backpack. "Don't reach into the bag," Greer said. His hand came up. Darius stopped. Both hands came up. Open, flat, raised to shoulder height. The universal posture of someone who has nothing to hide and understands completely and without bitterness that this is not sufficient. "I understand," he said. He said it quietly. "I'll come with you. Please be careful with the case." To understand what Darius Okafor did not do in that moment, what he refused to do at significant cost, you need to understand something about where he had been before he reached Seat 3A of Flight 608. He was 11 years old the first time a room told him he had arrived in the wrong place. His mother had taken him to a youth symphony concert at a historic performance hall in Center City, Philadelphia. Real tickets given to Gloria by her sister Constance, who worked near the theater district and had said with the particular warmth of someone offering something they genuinely mean, "Take that boy, Gloria. He needs to hear what an orchestra sounds like when it is all the way." They dressed up. Gloria wore the pearl earrings she saved for occasions that deserved them. Darius wore the dress shirt that was a size too large because Gloria had bought it to last 2 years. They walked in through the main entrance in the early evening light and were met inside the lobby by a man in a navy blazer whose job was to direct guests, and who looked at them with an expression that Darius at 11 did not yet have the words for, but that his body understood immediately: a brief calculation, a small adjustment, a decision. "These are balcony seats," the man said, looking at the tickets, looking at them. "Balcony entrance is around the back." Gloria looked at the tickets. She looked at the other guests walking past them into the main lobby without being stopped. She looked at the man. She took Darius's hand, not tightly, firmly. She walked him around the building to the side entrance, which was narrower and less well lit, and opened onto a stairwell used by venue staff. She held his hand the whole way. She did not say a single word about what had just happened. She walked him to their seats, which were excellent seats, unobstructed view, nothing wrong with them. And when the orchestra began, she leaned down and said quietly into his ear, "Listen to the cello section. Listen to where they enter." He listened. He remembered. Not just the music. He was 16 when it happened again. He had won a regional youth competition first place the first time he'd ever stood on a stage, while someone read his name as the winner, and his school had arranged for him to attend a 2-day master class at a conservatory 3 hours away. He arrived by bus early, carrying his instrument. He was the only black student in the program. He found the correct studio, let himself in, and sat down. When the instructor arrived and looked at the room, his eyes landed on Darius, and he said, without a pause, "Delivery entrance is on the south side of the building." Darius said, "I'm here for the master class." The instructor looked at him for a moment, then moved on without comment. He called the class to order. Over the course of the afternoon, he worked through each student in turn. When he reached Darius, he listened with his eyes closed for 4 full minutes. Then he opened his eyes and said quietly and completely, "Do that again. Slower. Give me the grief in it." Darius did it again, At the end of the session, the instructor shook his hand. He said, "You have something that can't be taught. I hope you know that." He did not mention the first moment. He probably did not remember it. Darius remembered every second of it, remembered the way it felt to be reduced to a delivery person by someone who had not yet heard a single note he could play. Remembered choosing in that moment to walk through the room anyway and let the music say what the man had refused to hear before it arrived. His mother had said it to him so many times it had become its own kind of foundation, layered under everything else he had built himself on. There will be rooms, baby, where the first thing they want from you is proof that you belong in them. You give them what they need to let you stay. And then you play so well that the room remembers you were there long after you've left it. He had done this, in room after room, year after year, with the specific discipline of someone who has decided that the cost of losing composure in the wrong moment is higher than the cost of holding it. And that holding it does not mean accepting. It does not mean agreeing with it, means only that you are choosing which battles to fight and how. And now he was 23, sitting in the first-class cabin of a transatlantic flight with both hands raised to shoulder height and an officer reaching for his arm, and somewhere inside all of that composure, something was still very steady. His mother's voice was in it. The cello was in it. The audition was in it. 30 feet forward, inside the locked cockpit, a phone screen had just lit up with an incoming text. The man reading it had gone very still. He was already getting to his feet. His hand was already moving toward the door. "I need to stop here for one moment and ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a situation where you had every right to be somewhere? Every right, every credential, every legitimate reason, and someone decided with one look that you didn't belong? Have you ever witnessed that happening to someone else and not known what to do with the weight of it? I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Tell me your city. Tell me your story. Because what is about to happen in this cabin is something none of these passengers will ever forget. Stay with me." The cockpit door did not open yet. Greer reached for Darius's arm. Before his hand made contact, a voice came from behind the first-class divider, clear and professional, and without apology. "That is not what happened." Sophia Reyes stood up. She held her phone with the screen facing forward, the recording indicator visible. She was 29, and she had spent 4 years in rooms where the official account and the witnessed account diverged, and she had learned that the most useful thing a person in her position could do was speak the witnessed account clearly and calmly, and repeat it without drama until it was heard. "I have been recording since Ms. Archer first approached the overhead bin," Sophia said. She addressed Greer directly. She made no physical contact with this passenger. She put her open hand near the case, not on Ms. Archer, near the case, and asked her not to damage it. She said, "Please, that is what the recording shows. I am happy to show it to you right now." Greer looked at the phone. He looked at Vivien. He looked at Darius, who had both hands raised to shoulder height and an expression that contained everything and released nothing. Patrick Ogundimu stood up from seat 2A. He stood with the deliberate care of a large man who has spent decades learning how to occupy space without alarming anyone who might already be alarmed by his size. He stood with his arms at his sides and his voice controlled and his eyes steady. "I was in seat 2. A for this entire exchange," he said. "I am going to tell you what I witnessed." He said it to Greer. He did not look at Vivien. He told them this young man was polite from the first word he spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not make any aggressive gesture. He placed an open palm near the case to protect it from being damaged, and he immediately removed his hand and apologized when Ms. Archer objected. "That is the complete account." Vivien turned to look at Patrick. "I don't believe I asked for your account," she said. "You didn't have to ask," Patrick said. He sat back down. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup and held it and looked at the tray table. Carol Dietrich in 2B was looking at her hands. She was 58. She had been a school principal for 19 years. She had sat through hundreds of difficult meetings. She had mediated disputes that were genuinely complicated with real competing claims on both sides. She was good at recognizing those situations, and she was equally good at recognizing when a situation was not complicated at all, when a thing was what it appeared to be, and the difficulty was not in understanding it, but in deciding whether the discomfort of naming it was worth bearing. Her husband's hand found her arm. A gentle, familiar touch that said, "Don't." She looked at Darius. His hands were up. His face was composed with the effort of a person managing something enormous. He was 23 years old. He had just said the words scholarship and audition and 11 years. She looked at her husband. She looked at his hand on her arm. She stood up. "Officer," she said. Her voice shook, but she kept going. She introduced herself, Carol Dietrich, 2B. "I've been sitting here since boarding. I saw everything from the moment Ms. Archer approached the bin." This young man did nothing threatening. He was courteous. He protected his property with an open hand and asked nicely. And she, Carol, looked directly at Vivien. She came on board and immediately tried to use his bin space, accused him without any basis, and called security after he refused to accept her characterization of a situation she had created. That is what happened. I am prepared to write that down and sign it. The cabin had gone very quiet again. A different quiet this time, not the held breath of people who didn't know what to do with what they were hearing, but the fixed attention of people who had moved to a side, who had arrived at their position. Vivien looked at Carol with the particular expression she reserved for things that were unexpected. "Ma'am," she said, her voice perfectly measured, "I understand your concern, but I was the one who felt threatened. My perception of what happened is what matters in this context." Sophia spoke from her position in 4C, steady and clear. "The evidence is what matters in this context, and I have 48 minutes of it." Something shifted between Greer and Morales. It was not a decision. It was a hesitation, a pause, the first real one either of them had allowed since walking through the forward door. The witnesses had multiplied. The phone was visible and its recording indicator was still running. The young man whose arm Greer was reaching for had raised both hands and had not moved and had not raised his voice and had not done a single thing across the entirety of what they had been told that suggested threat. Greer's hand slowed. Vivien saw it. She recognized it immediately, the slight loosening in an officer's posture that means the momentum she had built was stalling. She had used institutional pressure as a tool for a long time, and she knew what it looked like when the tool was not going to complete its work without additional force. She looked at Greer and her voice dropped into the precise register she used when she needed to close something. "Officer, I have filed a formal security complaint regarding this passenger. I have made clear that I feel unsafe. I want to be explicit with you if this situation is not resolved according to the protocol that applies to Platinum Elite complaints of this nature. I will contact the Federal Aviation Administration from this gate. I will name every member of this crew by name, and I will ensure that your handling of this report is part of the official record." She let the sentence sit. "I am asking you to do your job." Greer straightened. He looked at Darius. "Sir," he said, "I need you to step off the aircraft with us now." Darius looked back at him. He was not shaking. There was nothing left in him to shake. He had passed through the panic and arrived somewhere on the other side of it in the specific clarity that sometimes appears when a situation has become too large for fear, and only two things remain, what you can control and what you can't. "I will come with you," he said. His voice was barely above a breath. "Please be careful with the case." Morales stepped forward and reached into the overhead bin. He pulled at the handle of the carbon fiber case. The case caught on the rim of the bin. He pulled harder. The case came free with a jolt. Darius was on his feet before he understood he was moving both hands forward, not grabbing, not aggressive, just the helpless reflex of a person watching something irreplaceable being handled roughly. "Back up," Greer said, and both his hands came down on Darius's shoulders and pushed him firmly with real force back into the seat. The physical contact struck the cabin like a current running through it. Carol Dietrich made a sound. Patrick Ogundimu's hands went white around his coffee cup. The man in 1D, who had been staring at the ceiling, finally looked. The woman in 1A, who had looked away, finally looked back. Darius sat where he had been placed. Both hands came up, open, high, the posture of someone who has surrendered everything except the thing that cannot be surrendered. One tear ran from the corner of his left eye to the edge of his jaw. He wiped it away with the back of one hand, then raised the hand again. He was not going to cry. He had decided somewhere in the last 5 minutes that this moment was not going to get any more of his grief than it had already collected. "I'm not resisting," he said. The words came out barely a sound. "I am not resisting. I'll go." Greer wrapped his hand around Darius's upper arm. He was going to stand him up. The cockpit door opened. The sound it made was specific. A metallic latch releasing. A brief rush of pressurized air from the sealed flight deck. A silence that descended over the first-class cabin faster than silence usually falls, as though every person in those rows had inhaled at exactly the same moment and held it. Every head turned. Captain Raymond Holloway stepped into the aisle. He was 61 years old, and he stood 6 feet 2 inches, and the posture he carried had been built across 22 years in the United States Air Force. 2 combat deployments, 1 emergency landing in conditions that still appeared in aviation training materials, followed by 19 years of commercial flying for transatlantic. His hair was silver and cut close. His uniform was pressed to an exactness that suggested it always was. His 4 gold stripes caught the cabin lighting as he moved. He did not rush. He walked the length of the first-class cabin at the same measured pace he used every time he walked it, but the quality of what he carried as he moved was different. His steel-gray eyes were fixed on the scene in row 3 with the focused attention of someone who has taken in the situation, processed it, and arrived at his position. There was no deliberation visible. The deliberation had already happened. He walked past Marcus Webb, who stepped back without being asked. He walked past the galley where Heather Voss was standing with her hands pressed flat against the wall. He passed every row without acknowledging the faces turning toward him. He stopped in the aisle between rows 3A and 3C, and every person in that cabin felt the temperature of the room change with his arrival, the way the temperature of a room changes when something large and certain enters it. He looked at Greer's hand wrapped around Darius's arm. He looked at Morales holding the carbon fiber case at his side with one hand, uncertain what to do with it. He looked at Darius. And in that moment, before he spoke a single word, something in his face moved, not dramatically, not in a way you could photograph or describe precisely. It was the particular change that comes over a person's face when they see something they recognize, and the recognition is personal. Not professional. Personal. He looked at Morales. "Please set the case down," he said, gently. Morales set it down. He looked at Greer. "Please release this passenger." Greer's hand opened. Darius's arm came free. Captain Holloway bent down and picked up the carbon fiber case with both hands, the way you pick up something that matters with the weight distributed with care given to the balance of it. He placed it back into the overhead bin and closed the bin with a soft, deliberate click. He turned to face the aisle. He looked at Greer and Morales. His voice, when it came, did not need to rise to fill the cabin. It simply did the way the voice of someone with real authority fills a space without effort, the way sound travels further when there is no wasted noise underneath it. "Officers," he said, "my name is Raymond Holloway. I am the captain and pilot in command of Transatlantic Flight 608. Under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 91.3, I am the final authority as to the operation of this aircraft and every person aboard it. He paused one beat. What is the stated basis for this removal? We received a report of a passenger feeling unsafe, sir, Greer said. He had straightened without intending to. A Platinum Elite complaint came through the crew. Captain Holloway raised one hand. The gesture was precise. Not dismissive, the gesture of someone redirecting a process that is moving in the wrong direction. He turned to the cabin. His voice carried to every row. I want to tell every person on this aircraft something, he said. His name is Darius Okafor. He is 23 years old. He is traveling to London to audition for a full scholarship at the Royal Academy of Music, one of the most respected music conservatories in the world. He is traveling with a 19th century French cello on loan from the Meridian Arts Foundation. That instrument was cleared by transatlantic operations before this aircraft boarded. The Foundation's pre-approval documentation is attached to this flight's manifest. The upgrade of this passenger's seat was processed correctly and completely through the Foundation's account. He paused. The cabin held itself very still. I know these things, Captain Holloway said, because I reviewed the Foundation's accommodation request personally before this flight. I sit on the board of directors of the Meridian Arts Foundation. He said the next sentence clearly and without any additional weight placed on it, because it didn't need any weight. It had its own. And it was I who personally approved this passenger's placement in seat 3A. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the ones that had come before it. Those had been the silence of a room withholding judgment. This was the silence of a room whose judgment had just arrived. Vivien Archer had gone very still in seat 3C. Her champagne silk blouse was exactly as it had been when she boarded. Her blazer still fitted exactly as it had been fitted. But something behind her eyes was moving a rapid internal reassessment of the landscape the way a navigator recalculates when a landmark appears in the wrong position. Captain Holloway turned to look at her. He did not step toward her. He simply turned, and in the quiet of that cabin the direction of his attention was enough. Ms. Archer, he said, you filed a report with law enforcement stating that this young man was aggressive and threatening. Can you describe the specific threatening behavior you witnessed? Vivien's jaw was set. He interfered with my bin access. He was hostile and defensive. He placed an open hand near an instrument case when he believed you were about to damage it, Captain Holloway said. He said, please. He apologized to you. There are multiple witnesses to this account. One of them has documented the entire exchange on video beginning at the moment you approached the overhead bin. He looked at Sophia, who held up her phone. Ms. Sophia Reyes, Captain Holloway said, without hesitating on the name. He knew it from the Foundation's network. She had covered the scholarship program's inaugural year, and he had read the piece. She is a journalist. He said it as simple information. Vivien looked at Sophia. Something shifted in her face that was harder to read than anger or confidence. Something more fundamental. The particular expression of a person who has for the first time understood the full dimensions of the room they are in. Captain Holloway spoke again, and his voice was the same exact, steady, carrying no more force than was needed and no less. There is one more thing I want everyone on this aircraft to know, he said. He looked at Darius. Darius was sitting in seat 3A. His hands were in his lap. He was looking up at Captain Holloway with the suspended attention of someone who does not yet understand what is happening but who can feel that the weight of the room has changed completely. The Meridian Arts Foundation, Captain Holloway said, awards a prize each year to a young musician of extraordinary talent who has had to overcome significant barriers to reach their potential. The prize is called the Holloway Prize. He paused. It is named for my wife. Ruth Holloway spent 31 years teaching music in public schools in Baltimore. She spent those years watching talented young children with gifts that could have taken them anywhere run out of road because nobody opened a door. She established the prize 3 years before she died. Her specific instruction to the board was find the ones that the world almost missed. Find them early enough that it's not too late. He stopped. She heard Darius's recorded audition submission 8 months ago, he said. She had been sick for 6 months by then. She sat with the foundation board by video call and she listened to the recording twice, and after the second time she said, and I am telling you what she said as closely as I can remember it because it matters this one. This is exactly who we built this for. He looked directly at Darius. You are the third recipient of the Holloway Prize, he said, and the upgrade in Seat 3A was purchased by me, personally, because I wanted to make sure you arrived rested for the most important audition of your life. The cabin released a sound that was not a gasp and not speech. It was the sound of a narrative dismantling in real time, of a story told with absolute confidence, turning out in every particular to be about the wrong person. Vivien Archer looked at Captain Holloway. She looked at Darius. She looked at the overhead bin where the cello case was resting, the same case she had tried to compress with her garment bag 40 minutes earlier before the morning had gone anywhere close to where it had now arrived. Greer and Morales stood in the aisle and neither of them moved. Carol Dietrich sat down because her legs had stopped being dependable. Patrick Ogundimu let out a breath that had been held so long it left him visibly lighter. Richard Gauld in 3B had put down his newspaper completely for the first time since boarding. Sophia kept recording. Captain Holloway looked at Vivien, and his voice did not soften, and it did not harden. It remained exactly what it had been, precise, even final. Miss Archer, he said, filing a false security report on a commercial aircraft is a federal offense under Title 49 of the United States Code. I am not telling you this as a threat. I am telling you as information. You have a choice to make in the next few minutes. You may remain on this aircraft and fly to London, in which case you will sit in your seat without speaking to this passenger, and upon landing you will face a formal airline review of your conduct and your report. Or you may choose to disembark at this gate, which will give you more options in how you handle what follows. We push back in 8 minutes. I suggest you decide now. The cabin waited. Vivien looked at Captain Holloway, who did not blink. She looked at Darius Okafor, sitting in Seat 3A with his hands in his lap, watching her with an expression that contained no malice, no triumph, no visible anger. Just an open, quiet watchfulness. The look of someone who has been through something and is still here. Vivien Archer picked up her bag. She did not speak. She did not look at anyone except the aisle in front of her. She walked toward the forward door with her chin at the angle it always assumed. Her blazer still fitted. Her heels still made precise sounds on the floor. She walked through the door and into the jet bridge without pausing, and the aircraft door closed behind her with a sound that was unremarkable and absolute. The door closed. For 2 seconds, the cabin held the silence of a held breath, the specific silence that exists in the space between something ending and the understanding of it arriving. Then Carol Dietrich began to clap. She started it from Seat 2B, slow and deliberate, the rhythm of someone releasing something they have been carrying since they boarded. Her husband joined immediately. Patrick Ogundimu stood from 2A and brought his large hands together with the deep, purposeful sound of a man who has been waiting a long time for something to be over. The man in 1D who had spent 20 minutes absorbed in his phone put it face down and clapped. The woman in 1A who had looked at her laptop and looked away and looked at her laptop again was clapping with her eyes wet. Richard Gauld in 3B put down his newspaper completely and clapped with the expression of someone paying a debt they didn't know they owed. Business class behind the divider had heard every word through the curtain, and the applause moved through it too tentative at first, then fuller, then something that filled the cabin with the specific cathartic sound of people who had watched something wrong being corrected. It was not polite applause, it was not the golf clap variety. It was the sound of people who needed to release what they had been sitting inside and who were doing it with their hands because nothing else was available. Captain Holloway stood in the aisle and let it run. He did not bow. He did not take a moment for himself. He watched Darius. Darius was sitting in seat 3A with his head bowed and his shoulders moving with the quiet, deep, uncontrolled rhythm of someone who has been holding something enormous for a very long time and has been finally given permission to set it down. He was not sobbing. He was not making any sound. He was breathing the kind of breathing that happens when the restriction on it lifts expansive and involuntary and shaking through the chest and shoulders. Captain Holloway waited for the applause to ease. Then he walked to the seat and sat down in 3C, the seat Vivien Archer had vacated, and leaned forward with his forearms on his knees. He spoke at a volume for Darius alone. "You are going to be all right," he said. Darius looked up. His eyes were wet, and his face showed everything it had not been allowed to show for the last 40 minutes. He swallowed. "I don't," he started. "I don't know what to say. I didn't know I didn't know any of this." "You weren't supposed to?" Captain Holloway said. "Ruth always said the gift should come before the giver. The gift is the scholarship program and the open door. I'm just the person who held it." He looked at the overhead bin. "That case okay?" "It's fine," Darius said. "The padding is good. It handled the impact." Captain Holloway nodded once. "Good." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My wife used to describe the moment she heard a student who had it. She said it felt like recognition, like hearing something that was already in the room before the music started. She heard your audition recording in February. She asked the board to play it twice. When it finished, she said without any drama, 'That's the one.'" He paused. "She passed 7 weeks after that meeting." Darius couldn't speak for a moment. He looked at the man across from him, the pilot, the board member, the husband, and understood something about the weight that this trip carried for Captain Holloway that had nothing to do with aviation. "She would have wanted to be in London tomorrow," Captain Holloway said simply. "Since she can't be, I'm going to do the next best thing." He stood up. "Which is, make sure you get there without any more of this morning left in you." He straightened his uniform. He looked at Darius with the warm, unguarded directness of someone who is done with formality for the moment. "Sleep," he said. 9 hours is enough if you use them. I'll make the ride smooth." "Yes, sir," Darius said. The words came out rough with everything he was still processing. "Thank you. For all of it." Captain Holloway gave a single nod and walked back toward the cockpit. His steps were unhurried and even. The cockpit door closed. Marcus Webb appeared at Darius's row. He stood there for a moment without speaking, and what was visible in his face was neither the professional composure he had deployed for the last 40 minutes, nor the institutional deflection of a man citing policies he doesn't believe in. It was plainer than both of those. The expression of someone who knows they made the wrong call and is not going to dress that knowledge in anything other than what it is. "I owe you an apology," he said. He said it directly, not wrapped in airline phrasing. I saw what the documentation said. I knew the situation clearly. I let the pressure of the complaint override what I could see with my own eyes. That was wrong, and I'm sorry for it. Darius looked at him. He didn't say it's okay. He said, "I appreciate you saying that." He meant it. Marcus nodded. He hesitated, then said, "Can I get you anything? Water, a blanket, anything at all?" "Just water," Darius said. "And do you have headphones? I'd like to listen to some music." Marcus returned 2 minutes later with a cold bottle of water and a pair of noise-canceling headphones from the crew reserve stock. He handed them over without a speech. He started to move away and then stopped one hand on the seat back. "What are you going to play?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Elgar Darius said. "The cello concerto." Marcus nodded. He clearly didn't know the piece, but the nod carried something genuine. "Good luck," he said. Heather Voss appeared briefly at the galley entrance. She looked at Darius for a moment. She did not speak. Something in her face suggested she was having an internal conversation that had not resolved and would not resolve quickly, and that this was probably appropriate. She turned back into the galley. Carol Dietrich appeared beside Darius's row. She had unbuckled and come across the aisle, and she stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, and the red-rimmed eyes of someone who has cried at something they didn't expect to cry at. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up sooner," she said. I knew from the first sentence. I've been a school principal for 19 years, and I know what it looks like when someone is being treated unjustly. I knew, and I stayed seated because it was easier. She shook her head. That's something I'm going to think about for a while. Darius looked at her. He said, "You stood up. That's what I'll remember." She nodded. She went back to her seat. Patrick Ogundimu did not come over. He looked at Darius from 2A with the expression of a man who has said what he needed to say by saying it when it counted. He raised his coffee cup a fraction. Darius gave him a small nod. That was all that was needed. Sophia Reyes lowered her phone. The recording indicator went off for the first time since she had started it. She sat with the footage for a moment, 48 minutes of it, and felt the weight of what she was holding. Then she typed a message to her editor. 3 sentences. He called back in 90 seconds. "How fast can you file?" her editor asked. "I'll have the cut to you before we cross the Atlantic," she said. She called James Adeyemi at the Meridian Foundation. The call lasted 4 minutes. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "He's okay. He's okay," Sophia said. "He's putting on headphones." James Adeyemi sat at his desk on the 14th floor of a midtown building and stared at the city through the window and let out a long breath that he had been holding since 6:40 that morning. He sent one text to Captain Holloway's private number. It said, "She heard the right thing." The captain up in the flight deck read it. He didn't reply. He placed the phone in the compartment beside him. He looked at the instruments in front of him. The instruments he had spent 40 years learning to read, the way he read everything precisely without sentiment, with complete attention. He placed his hands where they were supposed to be. He looked at the runway unspooling ahead of the aircraft. He thought about Ruth. He flew the plane. In seat 3, a Darius Okafor put on the headphones and pressed play on a recording of the Elgar. The cello entered on the second bar, low and warm and absolutely certain. He closed his eyes. He leaned back in the leather seat of the first-class cabin that was his, that had always been his, and he let the music do what music does when everything else is too large to hold carry it. Outside the aircraft windows, New York tilted away. The cloud cover opened and the sky above it was clear and enormous and full of stars that were already fading into the first pale suggestion of dawn. He slept. Vivien Archer walked off the jet bridge and back into the terminal with the particular fury of a woman who is absolutely certain she has been wronged. She was wrong about this, but she didn't know it yet. She went to the airline service desk and stated her complaint to the representative there in full, precise detail. The representative was professional and careful and offered to connect her with the airport's customer relations office. Vivien declined. She asked for the airline's senior operations contact. There were 2 hold periods. She spent them standing at the desk with her carry-on at her side and her garment bag over her shoulder, composing what she was going to say next with the efficiency of someone who has made formal complaints before and knows the structure that produces results. By the time she reached a supervisor, something in the supervisor's voice had a quality she could not immediately identify. Careful in a way that was different from the careful that institutions use when they are managing an upset customer. Careful in the way of someone who is managing something they did not expect and are not sure how to handle. The next direct flight to London departed in 5 hours. She booked it. She needed to be in London. Her Monday morning meeting with the Kensington Aldridge Group, the firm's most significant European client, was not movable. The meeting was about maintaining management of a $400 million portfolio. It was the single most important client conversation of her quarter. She went to the Platinum Lounge. She ordered sparkling water and coffee. She chose a chair in a corner with a charging station and good sight lines to the departure board. She organized her thoughts. She was good at this, at taking a situation that had gone sideways and reassembling it into a version she could manage. She had been doing it for decades, and she had the track record to prove it worked. She did not check social media. She considered it on balance a platform for people who needed external validation. Her assistant monitored it. He would flag anything relevant. Her assistant did not call for 2 hours. This seemed consistent with him managing the rebooking logistics. At hour 2 and 15 minutes, he called. He did not say hello. He said, "Vivien, there is a video." She asked, "How many views?" His pause lasted 3 full seconds. 19 million, he said. "As of 30 minutes ago. It is increasing." She was quiet. She asked who shot it. "A journalist named Sophia Reyes. She covers civil rights. It's been picked up by 6 outlets so far." Vivien set down her coffee. "Send me the link." She watched 9 minutes of footage in the corner of the Platinum Lounge. She watched herself say, "People like you don't sit in this section." She watched the steadiness of Darius's hands on his knees. She watched the officers arrive. She watched Greer's hands come down on Darius's shoulders with real force. She watched Darius raise both hands and say in a voice barely above a breath, "I'm not resisting." She watched Captain Holloway step out of the cockpit. She watched herself walk up the aisle with her garment bag over her shoulder and her chin at its angle and her heels making their precise sounds. And she watched the door close behind her. She sat with the phone in her lap for a long time. She called her attorney. He picked up on the first ring. He had already seen it. His voice had the careful quality she recognized as his legal exposure register. "Vivien," he said, "before we discuss anything else, I need to know what was your actual experience of the events on that aircraft." She said, "I felt genuinely threatened." He said, "The video shows a young man with his hands raised saying, 'I'm not resisting.'" She didn't answer that. He said, "I can help you with a lot of things. But the first step right now is not to issue any statement. Don't call anyone at the airline. Don't post anything. Don't respond to any press inquiry. Are we clear?" she said. "What about my meeting tomorrow?" He paused. He said, "Call your CEO." She called her CEO. He picked up on the second ring. He did not say hello either. "I've seen it," he said. "I've seen all of it." "It doesn't represent what actually happened," she said. He said, "Vivien, the Kensington Aldridge Group has been in contact with our client relations office for the last 2 hours. He paused. "They are suspending all portfolio discussions." Vivien went very still. "The Kensington Aldridge Group," her CEO continued, "has issued a statement." He read it to her. It was brief. It said that the group did not maintain business relationships with individuals whose public conduct contradicted the values of equity and equal access that their institution had been built on. Vivien looked at the departure board across the Platinum Lounge. Flight numbers cycling. Destinations scrolling past. She said, "They are reacting to a viral video." He said, "They are reacting to what happened on that aircraft." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the voice he used when a decision had already been made, "The board is convening tomorrow morning. I think you should be available by phone. And Vivien, I want to be direct with you. I believe the outcome of that call is already determined. She flew to London anyway." 5 hours in first class on a rebooked ticket, the aisle seat in a row by herself, sitting with a posture that gave nothing away to anyone watching her. She did not sleep. She looked at the back of the seat in front of her and thought about the 9 minutes of footage that 19 million people had watched in the time she had been sitting in the Platinum Lounge. She had said, "People like you don't sit in this section." She had said it out loud, in a cabin, on a commercial aircraft, in front of multiple witnesses, on camera. She had said it, and she had meant it, and the meaning of it, what it actually said about the calculation she had made when she looked at Darius Okafor in seat 3, was not something she could explain away with context. She had tried in the hours since to find the framing that would make it other than what it was. She was good at framing. She had been framing things professionally for 3 decades. This one would not frame. The meeting with the Kensington Aldridge Group lasted 11 minutes. Their managing director, a measured man in his 60s named Blackwood, sat across the mahogany table from her with 2 of his board colleagues beside him, and a tablet face up on the table between them. He pressed play on the tablet without preamble. She watched 9 minutes of herself. Again. In a boardroom that had been built to hold conversations about the responsible management of $2 billion in charitable assets. When it finished, he said, "This foundation, Ms. Archer, the Meridian Arts Foundation, has been a partner institution of ours for 11 years. We funded their inaugural scholarship program. We attended the ceremony where the first award was given." He looked at her. "The young man you attempted to have removed from that flight is this year's recipient of a prize named for the late wife of the aircraft's captain who sits on the foundation's board." He clasped his hands on the table. "I am not going to tell you what I think of your conduct on that aircraft," he said. "I believe the footage communicates that more effectively than I could. What I will tell you is this: we do not place our capital or our institution's reputation into the hands of individuals whose judgment we cannot trust. What you demonstrated on that aircraft was not a misunderstanding. It was a failure of character. Those cannot be disclosed away." He stood up. "We wish you the best," he said. The meeting was over. She rode back to her hotel in a car that moved through London traffic at the particular pace of a city, indifferent to whoever is inside the vehicle. She sat in her room and took off her blazer and looked at the gray London afternoon outside the window. She thought about the portfolio. She thought about the board call. She thought about her attorney's voice and her CEO's voice and the managing director's voice, all of them having the same quality, measured, careful, already decided. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter. 26 years old. She had seen the video. Of course she had seen it. The text said, "Mom, call me when you're ready. I'm not angry. I just need to understand." Vivien read it twice. She put the phone face down on the bed. She opened her laptop. She opened a blank document. She typed for a long time, not a statement, not a legal document, not a response to the press. Something else. Something she did not have a category for. She saved it without a title and closed the laptop. She did not send it for 6 weeks. Flight 608 touched down at Heathrow at 8:49 in the morning local time. The London light was exactly as London light is in October, a particular shade of muted silver that manages to be beautiful, not despite itself, but because it has stopped trying to be anything other than exactly what it is. Darius walked off the aircraft with the carbon fiber case secure on his back and the specific rested clarity of someone who has slept deeply after something enormous. Captain Holloway had in fact made the ride smooth. He had come out of the cockpit once during the flight not to check on Darius. Specifically, he was doing his standard walkthrough, but he had paused at row 3A and said quietly, "Still good." And Darius had said yes, and the captain had nodded once and continued walking. That was all. It was enough. More than enough. The taxi to South Kensington took 40 minutes through morning traffic. The driver asked where he was from, and when he heard Philadelphia, said he had a friend there, and that was the length of a conversation that was precisely as long as Darius needed it to be. He looked out the window at London, moving past the streets, the buildings, the particular density of a city that has been arranged and rearranged by centuries, and felt something he recognized as readiness. Not calm exactly. Something with more current running through it than calm. Ready. The hostel the Foundation had arranged was small and clean in the way of places that take pride in the specific things they do. Well, the practice room on the ground floor had been reserved for him until 10 p.m., per the Foundation's request, and the bed in his room had clean sheets and a window that looked onto a small courtyard where pigeons moved with the purposeful inefficiency of pigeons everywhere. He unpacked the cello first. He lifted it from the case and held it for a moment. He looked at the neck, the bridge, the tailpiece, everything intact, everything exactly as it should be. He set it up on the floor, tightened the bow, and drew it across the strings in a single slow motion. The note that came out was warm and full and completely itself. He played for 2.5 hours. Not the audition piece. Whatever his hands needed, scales, fragments, passages from pieces he had learned years ago, things his fingers knew without consulting his brain. The conversation between his hands and the instrument resuming from where it had been interrupted. By the end of the 2.5 hours, he was playing the Elgar, and he was not drilling it. He was living in it, moving through it the way you move through a landscape you have learned from memory, not performing the geography but inhabiting it. He packed the cello away and slept. He woke at 5 in the morning, played for another hour, showered, ate breakfast in the small dining room, and took the Underground to South Kensington. 4 minutes walk to the Academy. He arrived 20 minutes early. The stage manager met him at the stage door, efficient, warm, neither quality performed. She showed him the green room, the warm-up space, the layout. She told him the panel would be ready at 10. She left him to his preparation. He warmed up for 35 minutes. His name was called. He walked out onto the stage of the Duke's Hall and stopped. The room was one of those rooms that have been used for their exact purpose for so long that the purpose has become part of the architecture. You can feel it in the ceiling height, in the particular quality of the air, in the way the space opens to receive sound, as though it was specifically designed to welcome exactly this and nothing else, which it was. The ceiling was high and coffered. The walls were warm with paneling that had absorbed 100 years of music. The acoustics were the product of a century of care by people who understood that sound is physical, that a room either holds it or it doesn't, and that the difference between the two is not decorative. 5 judges sat at a long table in the center stalls. They did not look up when he entered. This was standard. He had been told to expect it. He stood on the stage for a moment. He thought about his mother. About a side entrance and a pearl earring and a hand that held his without grasping, firm and steady, teaching the difference between indignity and defeat. He thought about a master-class instructor who said maintenance entrance and then shook his hand and never bridged the distance between those two moments, and how Darius had decided at 16 that the bridge was not his to build, only the music was. He thought about seat 3A and both hands raised, and one tear wiped away and a cockpit door opening. He thought about Ruth Holloway, who he had never met, who had sat in a video call in February with a room full of board members and said this one, and who had not lived to see whether she was right. He sat down. He adjusted the end pin. He placed the bow. He played. What came out of that cello was not a performance. Performances are things you give to rooms. What Darius played was a testimony, the specific physical account of 11 years of Saturday mornings, and a scholarship application rewritten 4 times, and a flight where someone told him he didn't belong, and he sat with his hands visible on his knees and waited for the truth to arrive. It was the account of a boy who had been sent through side entrances and maintenance doors, and had come through all of them, and arrived here in this room with this instrument, with this piece that was written by a man who had lost something enormous and had decided to make something beautiful out of the surviving of it. The Elgar Cello Concerto in E minor is a piece about continuation. about the specific act of going on when going on requires more than you expected it to. It is not triumphant in the conventional sense. It is something more durable than triumph. It is the sound of someone still here. Darius played the last chord and kept the bow on the string and kept his head bowed, and his chest heaved with the effort of everything the previous hour had taken from him. The hall held its silence for 10 seconds. The lead judge, a woman who had conducted master classes on 3 continents and was known in conservatory circles for applying rigorous critical distance to every audition, regardless of how it moved her set down her pen. She removed her glasses. She began to applaud. The other judges joined her. Darius lifted his head. The letter arrived by hand at the hostel at 2 in the afternoon. Cream stationery, the Academy's crest embossed at the top. The language was measured and formal and completely clear. Full scholarship, immediate commencement, housing provided, instrument accommodation arranged in coordination with the Meridian Arts Foundation. He sat on the edge of the bed and held the letter and looked at it for a while. Then he called his mother. She answered on the second ring. He said, "Mom." Just that one word. She heard everything in it. He heard her hear it. They didn't speak for a moment. 4,000 miles of phone line and 30 years of choosing and sacrificing and driving on Saturday mornings and selling a bracelet, and never not once making him feel what it cost. She said, her voice full and steady, "I knew it." He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that surprises you, the kind that arrives when something has finally landed. "Thank you," he said. "You did that," she said. "We did," he said. She was crying by then quietly, and he sat with it. He looked out the window at the London courtyard, at the gray sky above it, at the pigeons doing what pigeons do with total commitment and no self-consciousness, and he felt something he recognized as peace. Not the absence of difficulty. Something better than that. The knowledge that the difficulty had been moved through, and the other side of it was here, and it was this. Sophia Reyes's footage went live that afternoon, and by midnight it had been viewed by 23 million people across 4 platforms. Transatlantic Airlines issued a formal statement within 48 hours. They confirmed Vivien Archer's removal from Flight 608, confirmed that the documentation for Darius's accommodation had been correct and fully pre-approved, and announced a complete review of how Platinum Elite complaints were weighted against passenger rights in situations involving third-party bookings. Rosa Medina, the gate agent who had scanned Darius's boarding pass that morning with warmth and accurate documentation, received a formal commendation from the airline's operations division. One of the few genuinely good things that came out of an institutional response that was otherwise carefully drafted to limit liability. Marcus Webb filed an internal ethics disclosure detailing the pressures that had led to his hesitation in the cabin. His account opened a review of crew training that replaced the existing complaint handling framework with one that required independent verification before any action was taken against a passenger. Carol Dietrich sent a handwritten letter to the Meridian Arts Foundation. Patrick Ogundimu published a short essay about what it means to be a witness and what it costs to stay seated, and more people read it than anything he had written in 20 years. 3 weeks after the flight, Captain Raymond Holloway attended the Foundation's board meeting via video from somewhere over the mid-Atlantic. The board gave him a standing ovation before the agenda began. He raised one hand and said simply, "I opened a door." Darius walked through it himself. The Foundation announced the expansion of the Holloway Prize to 3 annual recipients with applications opening to musicians from public schools in 8 cities. James Adeyemi was named lead director of the expanded program and accepted the role in a single text message to the board chair that read, "Let's do it the way Ruth would have wanted." 6 weeks after the flight, a letter arrived at Darius's housing at the Academy. It was from Vivien Archer, long and careful and without excuses or context or explanation. It said only that she had listened to the recording of his audition released publicly with his permission as part of the Foundation's scholarship announcement, and that she understood for the first time and without qualification what she had almost prevented from reaching the world. Darius read it once. He put it in the drawer of his desk. He picked up his bow, went to the practice room, and played for 2.5 hours, and the music was exceptional, and nobody was watching, and that was the best part. I want to talk to you directly for a moment before you go anywhere. Darius Okafor did not get that scholarship because of what happened on Flight 608. He got it because he had been building toward it since he was 12 years old. Because his mother drove him to lessons every Saturday and sold a bracelet she could not replace and never once made him feel what it cost. Because he sat in front of 5 judges and gave them everything he had. That is why he got the scholarship. That was always going to be why. But here is the thing I keep coming back to when I think about this story. There were 24 people in that first-class cabin. Most of them saw exactly what was happening. Most of them knew, and most of them stayed in their seats. Not because they were bad people, I don't think most of them were, because staying seated is easier. Because getting involved in something uncomfortable on a flight is not what any of us pack for when we leave the house in the morning. Because the kind of pressure Vivien Archer used on that cabin was designed to make silence feel like the reasonable, neutral choice. Carol Dietrich stood up. Patrick Ogundimu stood up. Sophia Reyes pressed record. Captain Holloway walked out of his cockpit. Each one of them made a choice in a moment that was uncomfortable and costly and moving fast, and each one of them made it anyway. I think about what that took. Not the big dramatic version of courage, the kind that makes a good scene in a movie. The ordinary version. The kind where you know the moment is happening right now, and you have maybe 5 seconds to decide whether you are going to be someone who saw it and did something, or someone who saw it and looked away. You are going to be in those moments. Maybe you already have been. And when they come, the choice you make says more about who you are than any title, any tier status, or any seat you paid for. If this story meant something to you today, share it. Let it reach someone who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Subscribe if you haven't, because we are going to keep telling stories like this one for as long as there are people who need someone to press record. See you in the next one.